briefly, I want to start out telling you a little bit about Synaptic. I won't belabor this particular slide, but we've been in business for about 10 years now. Very early on, when it was just two of us, we did, work for hire, fixed price. You've got a problem where you think AI and machine learning can help your business. You've got some data, and we would go in and do the work and then, hand it over and walk away. What we found over time is that lots of businesses have problems on the data engineering side, sort of the piping to kind of get data to move around. And then they really want to surface the output of these intelligent systems to users, either internal or external. So we've slowly, through time, kind of bitten off more of that entire sequence of things. And so we think of ourselves now as an intelligent products company, where the idea is, we can sort of do the data lake work. I mean, we've done a lot of work using Databricks recently, actually over several years now. We can apply the modern AI and machine learning methodologies to it, and then we can surface it in a user experience that's going to be good for the people who are consuming the output of it. So that's us as a company. The outline for today, we've got a number of things. It looks like it's going to be a long presentation. I think we'll get through it pretty comfortably. But I'm going to start out by talking about why AI initiatives often stall before deployment. I mean, this is based on seeing lots of AI initiatives move in that direction. And, given the title of the webinar, you're probably going to understand that it's going to have something to do with data at least. Then we'll think about, well, what does it mean for your data to be AI ready? How do you know that your data is going to allow you to be successful in a project that's going to depend on it to be supplied to an AI or a machine learning system? And it turns out that I think there are just sort of a few things that you really have to pay attention to. There are some things that everybody pays attention to. So data cleaning, everybody's going to say, okay, we got to scrub our data. But I think that there are some other ways of thinking about more downstream processes that you might run on the data that are super important. We'll think about how to prioritize data work so that you focus on ROI as opposed to just making your data shiny and sparkly. Talk a little bit about, how do you get started on this? And then I'll have a few concluding thoughts. So, why do AI initiatives stall before deployment? So, I've cited some sources here, but according to one source, 75% of executives are ranking AI. And when they say AI, they mean generative AI, right? I mean, that's sort of if anybody says they're using AI, they're using language models essentially, or, vision language models. But they rank it as a top three strategic priority. So lots and lots of people are thinking about it as being very important. There was an IBM study that said that the growth rate of AI investments are going to more than double over the next 2 years. And I've seen lots of stats that show that's going to be the case. And then the final bullet here is that kindergartners are talking about AI. So this just goes, I'll give you an anecdote. This shows how deeply this notion of AI has penetrated. So my wife is a kindergarten teacher, and she overheard in the past week a couple of kids in her class. One of them was talking about some video, and the other kid goes, "Oh, that's an AI video. It's not real." So even kindergartners are getting to the point where AI is just becoming part of their life and part of the things that they're exposed to. So from kindergarten all the way up to executives, everybody's thinking that AI is important, and especially in business, people are making investments in it. But it turns out that making impact is hard. And again, we're going to kind of dig into the role that data has in this. So there was a, S&P Market Intelligence report that says that project failure is rising. So companies are abandoning a lot of their AI initiatives before production, and that number jumped from 17% to 42% year over year. There are a lot of reasons that may be happening. It's probably also that there's a lot of, FOMO, a lot of fear of missing out. And so lots of companies are saying, like, I got to have AI, right? And so what happens is they sort of jump in because they're worried about being left behind and other competitors talking about how they're using AI. And what happens is the projects aren't as well thought out as they could be. I think lots of organizations are taking very thoughtful approaches to it. But then also, on average, organizations say 46% of projects are scrapped between POC and broad adoption. And so another way of sort of slicing that statistic is that 46% say that there's no single enterprise objective saw a strong positive impact. Again, lots of reasons that that might happen. We're going to focus on the sort of data element of it. And so what I would say is I've been, working in this field since 1993 that I went to grad school to start on my PhD. So I've been doing it for a really long time. back in the early days, I would say, well, the algorithms aren't quite powerful enough to solve the particular problem that you want to work on. I had a friend in a machine vision lab when I was in graduate school who did his dissertation on counting tree canopies. Like I've got an overhead picture of a forest, and I'm just trying to figure out how many trees there are. I mean, these days you hand that to an online foundation model, and it'll go, there's 38 of them, right? So today, AI is ready. I think the tools are there. Now the limiting factor tends to be the data. And so, here's this cartoon that says, AI gives us real-time insights from all of our data. And the person says, amazing, what data? And they point over to this like stinking pile of garbage, which is the data. In my experience, it is very, very rare for an organization to have a literal stinking pile of garbage there of data, right? So the data is being used to support internal processes, it's being gathered organically. But what happens is data systems, like lots of things, kind of grow through time. New things are added, old things are removed, functionality is changed. And so what happens is the data starts to look a little worse for wear through time. And so we're going to talk today about what do you do when your data is a little bit worse for wear, which is a very, very common outcome, or I see that very commonly. So how do other people think about it? Is your data ready? It turns out that MIT Technology Review interviewed a lot of companies and said, to what extent are your organization's data foundations ready to support Gen AI applications, right? 22% said very ready. Everybody else is either somewhat unready, somewhat ready, or very unready. So people are thinking about this. They're thinking, hey, we'd like to be able to use Gen AI tools, but we're not sure whether our data is there or not. And that same, tech review, another way of looking at this is, what challenges do you face? Interestingly enough, the number one was around governance, security, and privacy. And we'll talk about that more, right? So data governance I think, is often viewed as a kind of a pain, but I'm going to suggest that it's an enabler. Like getting data governance right is an enabler as opposed to a blocker. So then other issues, data quality and timeliness, data silos or data integration challenges, cost and resource investments are up there. But basically, the bottom line is that lots of organizations just aren't ready to trust AI decisions. And by AI decisions, I mean outputs of AI systems that are going to have an actual impact on the stuff that your business is doing. They're not ready to trust those things at scale. What does it mean for data to be kind of AI ready? And I'm using this term AI ready to mean you can just start building AI systems and you have a pretty good chance of success, or at least you're not going to be held back by the data. So I think the first thing to remember is that data preparation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So, if your data really is a stinking pile of garbage, your output of your AI system is going to be a stinking pile of garbage, right? Everybody sort of knows about data cleaning cycles, and it goes from sort of low-level things to high-level things. So, you always sort of do EDA, and I'm actually working on EDA for a client now where you're looking at things like how much of our data is missing, are there duplicates? Then you go, all right, I kind of have a handle on the quality of the underlying data. Maybe I'm going to start doing joins. I want to build different views of the tables so that I can kind of get all the data I need into one location. You might have to integrate over systems. Standardizing definitions is one that we're going to talk about a lot later. Does this field mean the same thing in this database as that database? Shockingly, there are often subtle differences that are super meaningful. You also have to think about monitoring data quality through time, kind of understanding provenance, like where did that data come from? Where did this field come from? And then actually data governance, right? So how do you control who has access to it and who can change it? And so if you think about this from the kind of low level to high level, that is, I'm just in there trying to find missing values to I'm actually sort of establishing enterprise-wide policies about governance. I think a lot of organizations stop too early, right? Everybody's going to clean their data. You're going to have somebody who's going to sit down and go like, okay, like here's the quality of our data, but you need to push further than that is going to be one of the lessons. So, why can clean data still work against you? So data can be clean, but it can be inconsistent. And again, we see this kind of thing all the time. So I've got a customer count in two different systems. It might include trial users in one system, but not another. So now, when you're computing proportions or ratios or probabilities, you're going to get different numbers from the different systems, and you got to figure out which one is the right one. They can be integrated, but ambiguous. So I could have order dates, and those order dates could represent the date an order was placed or processed or fulfilled. And, it might be that you just have to adjudicate that. So different systems might be focusing on different parts of the order process, and you've got to make decisions as to when you're integrating it. A really bad one is data's available, but you don't trust it. And again, I've seen this so many times. So, the dashboard is showing revenue, but the finance team still goes, all right, that's fine, but we got an Excel sheet and we're going to run that Excel sheet because we've been doing that for years. And that's the thing we trust. So this notion of trust is super important in getting people to let go of their spreadsheets. We've got one client, it's not exactly this issue, but there's a thing known as Andy's spreadsheet. So turns out Andy's spreadsheet has this really deep domain knowledge buried into it about certain processes. But every like lots of companies, there's a person who's got a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is crucial to what's going on. And you really need to be able to sort of move those things out into more controlled systems. Also, data can be usable once, but not repeatable. So definitely seen cases where there's a person, I'm calling them Alex in this case because it seems like it's gender neutral, who just like fixes stuff. Like, oh, there's an ingest, and Alex goes, oh, like I know I need to run this like little script over here to look for this thing to kind of fix the data a little bit. And you can't have that, right? So it's got to be the case that everything is repeatable. And if one person isn't there that day to run the fix it script, everything is still going to be okay. So the point is that AI readiness is about the data system. So, again, the data's got to be in good shape, but the system around it has to be solid. So AI is not operating on raw data. Often when we do work with Databricks, for example, we use medallion architectures where we get the bronze, silver, and gold. Raw data comes in, but we're going to sort of go through processes to make sure that the data is ready to be, handed over to repeatable systems. So you got to have good definitions. You have to have pipelines in place that are robust and resilient. You have to always monitor quality of the data. You have to know who has access to it, and you have to have governance in place. And so the point is that the outcome of the system or the outputs of the system are a function of the system itself and not just the data. So it's the system that determines whether the data is going to work for you or against you. I would say that when data is working for you, what you get is you get reliable decisions. And again, decisions is this proxy for the system is making a decision, or potentially the system is producing information that's going to support human decision making. But the idea is that people trust it. There are decisions that people are going to act on. They're not going to go, oh, I don't know if I really trust that thing. The output's going to be explainable. You can actually understand and trace back to like, why is it telling me that thing? It's consistent, where if I run it repeatedly on the same inputs, I'm going to get the same result. And it's going to be scalable. And by that, I mean it's going to work beyond a pilot. And if I had to sort of pick two of those things that I have seen the most of, I've seen a lot of projects where it starts as a pilot and people are doing pilot kinds of things. There's a couple of people that have some Jupyter notebooks that they've got in some repo, and everybody looks at it and they go, yeah, okay, that looks pretty good, right? And it turns out that with AI systems these days, especially with coding assistants, you can get a thing that looks really impressive very quickly, but making it scale is a very different animal. And especially making it scale when you're applying it to large volumes of data. And then the other is trust. I have seen many cases where people sort of look askance at the output of the system and they go, well, I see what that thing is saying, but I trust a spreadsheet over here. Again, there's a spreadsheet lying around. I've been using that thing for years. I'm fine, right? I'm not going to use the output of that system. So what are the data foundations that I think actually matter? So I'm going to talk about four of them, and I'm just going to have a sequence of four slides where we go into these. There's got to be clarity about things like who owns the data, what are the definitions that we're working with, and again, I'm working with a client now. I'll talk about that in just a minute, where we're actually putting a lot of effort into making sure that the definitions are correct, or at least the definitions are well known and accepted among the people who are using and creating the system. There's got to be flow. So what are the pipelines? How does data access work? There needs to be integrity in the data. It must be the case that data quality is monitored on an ongoing basis, and there needs to be control. So how do we govern it? How do we maintain security? How do we ensure that we're not going to leak protected information? Sort of all these things are things that can impede having the data flow into a system and be used by a system that's going to make decisions. So we'll talk about each of those in turn. So clarity, what does clarity mean? Clarity means like this sort of shared meaning, right? And by that, I mean, what does this field mean? So, for example, under that failure box there, revenue could mean different things across different teams. And it's very, very common for this to happen because, and it's natural, right? So, a sales organization thinks of revenue in one way, an accounting organization thinks of revenue in another way. I know it's synaptic when we meet with our accountant. There are sort of different accounting methodologies. There's cash-based accounting and others, and I tend to zone out when we have these conversations. But there's sort of meaningful differences in the way you sort of think about a quantity. And those things, those differences have to be resolved explicitly as you build systems around the data. One reason is because AI, it doesn't fix inconsistency, it's going to amplify it. So if I have sort of different systems that have different meanings for the same named quantity, those differences are going to wind up being used to make downstream decisions and later inferences, and it's going to be a problem. So again, just this clarity mean like what does this data mean and who owns it? And in particular, where's the source of truth? So the source of truth could be, well, it's got to come from that particular database, or it could be, and often is, here is a document that defines sort of what we mean. And we create those kinds of documents all the time. We'll talk to interested parties and say, what do you think revenue means? What do you think revenue means? Oh, you guys are operating on different definitions. Let's actually try and reconcile those. So clarity first. Flow just means, are we going to move data reliably? Do we have reliable movement and access? And so the most painful part of AI projects that I see is this one, actually. So do we stand up the data pipelines? Are they stable? Does everybody have access to it? That access problem is pervasive, right? Every time you start a project, we have to get access to the data. That often takes a long time for very good reasons, right? These people are coming in. We need to make sure that they have read access to the correct, elements of the data. But if you're building a big data lake, for example, that means I might have to touch lots of systems. And so we spend a lot of time trying to get the pipelines in place so that the code and the people who are working on the code and evaluating the output can access it. So again, like this very common failure mode. I have participated in this failure mode before. The model works in a notebook, but it fails in production. I had a project I worked on a long time ago for a legal firm. It had to do with matching case metadata to documents. I had a notebook worked great. And then it turns out that we had our CTO spend basically a month of full-time effort and he's a data engineering ninja trying to scale it up to work in production. So, this notion of robust, efficient, effective pipelines is important because you can't work, if you don't have the data, you can't have an AI system working with it. Then integrity has to do with quality. So are there validation checks? Are we making sure that as data is loaded from different sources, we have code that's running that's saying, is this what we expect? Does this data distribution look like the kind of distribution that we've seen in the past? And are we monitoring it continuously? So an important issue there is again, another sort of common failure mode is what's called in literature domain shift, but it just means your data distribution is kind of changing through time. So very simple example of that is I've got a book review site and I've got an AI system that's classifying book reviews as kind of like positive or negative. Did they like the book or not like the book? And then somehow we start getting, movies that are coming. I get movie reviews and maybe those are different. And then we get reviews of other kinds of things coming in. And so what the worst kinds of failures are the silent failures. So the system is just like grinding along and somehow something has changed in the data distribution. The quality is different. You're getting data from another location. So, maybe you're getting radiology from one hospital and then you start getting radiology from another hospital, and the machines tend to be calibrated differently. And so people start going, oh, like this doesn't feel right, and this trust erodes over time, right? And those are very pernicious kinds of errors because they go unnoticed, but they have these kind of simmering effects. And then finally, control, right? You want governance that enables you. So are you robustly handling privacy and security? Are changes managed, especially changes to the data? What can happen is, people think about governance. Often they think about governance as something that slows things down, right? Like, okay, we just got to get the data in there. And, I've seen startups that do this because they're scrappy and they're having to work hard and they got limited money. But what I would suggest is that poor governance leads to upper management and executives often sometimes thinking about blocking deployment, right? So if there's sensitive information in there, you've got to convince somebody at a higher level that that's not going to get leaked out. And there are lots of subtle ways that sensitive information can leak. And so, putting into place very explicit guidelines and guardrails around who can access the data, who can make changes to it, how sensitive information is identified and handled is a thing where you can say, okay, look, I understand you have these concerns, but we have addressed them to the best of our ability. Here's what we're doing. And if they go, yep, I believe that that's the right way, that's the right policy to use, then people tend to trust the system and allow it to be deployed. All right. So, if you think about the sort of minimum viable operating model, you need to know who's accountable. You have to have definitions in place. Like, what do all these terms mean? You have to have a very well understood pipeline so you know how the data flows. And again, we tend to build pipeline diagrams when we work on projects. So like these data sources are being integrated in the following way, and we're doing these joins. You have to understand how errors are going to be caught. How do I avoid these sort of silent changes that are happening that are going to lead to lack of trust? You have to think about who has access, who's monitoring that access, and then how do updates happen. And by updates, I mean, changes to the data, right? So you have to think about changes to the code, but also sort of changes to the data, ingesting new sources. I'm getting data, like I said, from like two hospitals. I'm going to add a third hospital to get data from. I have to really think about what impact that's going to have. All right. How do you think about prioritizing data work? You can do lots of stuff. You're going to build a system. And here's why data initiatives struggle to deliver ROI. So I have seen several cases where a potential client will come to us and say, we got a bunch of data. We think it can help us do better as a business, either for internal applications or customer facing applications. And they have this mindset that they've got to fix it all, right? So we got to have everything integrated into a data lake before we try and do everything. Our data's got to be cleaned and prepped and deduplicated and all those kinds of things. So they go, okay, we're gonna go do this thing and we're gonna come back and talk to you next year. And the problem with that is that it's hard to know what the endpoint is, right? And so value is delayed until like all the data is there. There's like this sort of like we've got our data. We're going to get it into the gold layer and it's going to be shiny and new and it's going to be beautiful. But what happens is that the effort is spread very thin because you're touching all these data sources and the sort of impact never materializes. We'll talk about how to not do that in a minute. Sometimes you get too technical, right? So like, okay, we got to use this lake house, or we're going to use Databricks in the following way, and we've got to have Unity Catalog. I love Unity Catalog, it's fine, but we're going to sort of use these latest tools. And so sometimes what happens is you measure success by the implementation, right? Like, okay, we've ingested these sources into this database. So the problem is that, we built it doesn't always mean that the business is going to use it. And so you can have these like great systems. So the left-hand column is our data is all shiny and sparkly. The middle column here is our system is shiny and sparkly, but the great system might not change business decisions. And then the last one is that maybe you're too disconnected from decision. So, if what you're doing is you're trying to build a sparkly system and have sparkly data, if it's not tied to specific use cases and there's no clear owner of the outcome, then you can't really measure impact, right? And so what you have is that the data is improving, but the decisions aren't. So what do you think we should do, right? So the idea is to start with decisions, not data. Despite the fact that we're saying we're going to make our data work for us, you need to kind of flip it a little bit. So instead of saying what data do we have, think about what do you want to do with it, right? So where are our pain points? What decisions are the most important to us? Do we have low trust in some of those decisions? And is there inconsistency that's slowing us down, for example, right? So the idea is think about the pain point, and then what you're going to do is you're going to use the pain point to drive back to the data. So we're not going to fix everything. We're going to sort of fix what's blocking that business decision. So are the definitions aligned? Do we all agree that we're going to make this decision based on these quantities or using this particular approach? is the data that we need for that readily available, right? So we're not going to have to build an entire data lake with everything. We need to sort of get the pipelines working for the data we care about. Do we trust the inputs and is it being deployed safely, right? So start with a decision, use the decision to focus on the data and build the infrastructure that you need for that particular data set. So suppose you're trying to do AI-driven revenue forecasting, which is, a thing that we've looked at before. So it might be that if your approach is too broad, you're treating it as an enterprise-wide initiative and you're going to like get, the latest pipelines and platforms. And it might be disconnected because it's enterprise-wide and you're having a hard time aligning the definitions. So what we'll see in those cases is that you'll produce an output like here's some numbers, but the people who consume them don't really trust them and they might do some manual work. And so they're not going to use the forecasts and planning. And so you've sort of made this big investment, but the decision making hasn't changed because it hasn't been sort of taken. If, on the other hand, you say, all right, let's start with a decision, which is we want to have a weekly forecast. We're going to get everybody in the room who uses the weekly forecast to make decisions and say, okay, what do you like? What does revenue mean to you? If we've got existing data pipelines, we're going to kind of go in and do some work on the parts of the pipeline that are providing the data that allow us to forecast revenue, whose decision we now all agree on. And then we're going to add validation checks. So maybe what you do, it's a very good thing to do, is to say, all right, we're going to run this thing in parallel. So we're going to have our system running. We're going to take Jane or John's spreadsheet. We're going to run those things, and we're going to say, suppose you made your forecasts and your decision making was guided by those forecasts using these two systems. What's good, right? And so at that point, then you've brought everything along. The people who used to be using the spreadsheet go, okay, this is good, right? I get it. It's actually being used in weekly planning, and you have consistency and agreement across teams, right? So you sort of focused in on a particular thing and you just got the data and the pipelines ready for solving that particular issue. Okay. So how do you get started here? Again, like the message I'm trying to give is you don't have to boil the ocean. That's funny. I meant to actually find a boil the ocean image. So don't rebuild your entire data platform. Again, go back and look at the parts of the data platform that are relevant, shore those up, or maybe build a separate parallel path for a certain amount, some of the data to go through. You don't have to clean all the data. You need to clean the data that's going to be relevant. And don't think of it as sort of enterprise transformation because, as the scope gets broader, more people rightfully get concerned, right? So if you're doing enterprise transformation, CEO is definitely going to want to talk about it. So say, oh, what we really want to do is we want to try and impact one decision. So like pick a high value decision, something that, people are struggling with to do correctly, where there's uncertainty, where you have to make the decision a lot, or where, a lot of money or downstream impact is at play. Think about the gap. So you can think about this sort of clarity, flow, integrity, control. Where are we not doing well there? And then fix the stuff that matters, right? And so sit down and talk about it. And again, many times when you get people inside the company, even a couple of people from the same department, they might disagree a little bit about definitions of things or sort of what's important. Having those conversations just by themselves is useful, but it's essential for getting the data to come out in a way that everybody can be happy with the output. Just, fix the stuff that matters and then deploy it and use it. So it's interesting inside Synaptic, we're using AI coding assistants a lot, and a lot of that focus is on internal processes. So the CEO is building things, the CTO is building things, I'm building things, and it's super fun. I enjoy it. But I had a conversation and recently with the CEO, and I said, "Hey, what really matters to me is that people use this thing." And so, my approach has been, I'm going to build a thing. I'll let other people use it and see if there's uptake on it. And so, you have to be able to cut your losses at some point. But I'm focusing on trying to ensure that the people who might benefit from the thing I built know it exists, use it, give me feedback, and we try and actually get it out there and be deployed. So again, you have to, rolling out an enterprise transformation, it's hard to get everybody to buy into that thing. But if you say, here's a thing that can actually help you, it's going to make your job easier, faster, you're going to be more effective, you're going to make better decisions. Make sure you spend time getting the users to use that thing. Okay, so what are my concluding thoughts? So, how do you help your data help your AI initiatives? And like, by all means, clean it. So, I kind of talked about how data cleaning isn't enough. You're going to want to clean it because your executives want AI. And so you've got to have clean data, but you have to focus on these sort of higher level issues, right? So again, do we have clarity around definitions and who owns the data? Is the part of the pipeline that's there working well? And is it going to scale us up to the volumes of data that we need ultimately for production? Is the data sort of error free to the extent that we can get it? Are we monitoring it for issues and are we governing it correctly so that we can be sure that the output isn't sort of leaky of other kinds of information? You should also use decisions to drive effort, not data, right? And so again, that's just that flip that says, don't go, I need AI, let me start working on my data. You should say, what am I going to do? How is AI going to impact my business? Then let me let that lens focus on the data that's important to me. And yeah, so decisions focus on subsets of the data. And then the last thing, clearly, I think it's important to find a trusted partner. So I'm always amazed at the power of expertise. I don't know, like you interact with lots of people, you're a mechanic, you're a doctor, whatever. And there are many times I go, oh, I never could have figured that out, right? Like I'm the kind of guy who, before I go to the doctor, I'm using Chat GPT and used to be I would Google and I would try and figure out what was wrong with me, and I'm invariably not right. And so I think, if you find a trusted partner who sort of understands data ecosystems, especially data connected to AI applications, they can get you there faster. And, we often work in modes where we engage with clients and the clients are like, we really own this stuff. And so they use us as a force multiplier and as a way of educating their workforce around the issues that you need to think about. So if it's not us, I think finding someone who sort of knows this space is really important as you're getting into it. So that's it. Thank you. I appreciate you listening, and I would be happy to take any questions if there are any.